Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and things adjacent. And if you are tuning in, you're probably smarter than the average bear. This is a wild story from Taiwan. And towering arch bridge in Taiwan suddenly collapses, crushing boats below. Did you see that? It's wild. Towering arch bridge over a bay in eastern Taiwan collapsed Tuesday, sending a burning oil tanker truck falling onto boats in the water below. An Air Force helicopter, fishing vessels, and more than 60 military personnel, including divers, were searching for possible victims. But here's the kicker, though. The weather at the time was sunny, but the collapse occurred hours after a typhoon swept by the island. Disaster relief officials would not say if the storm had weakened the bridge or give other details on the potential cause. Government-run Central News Agency said a bridge pier may have collapsed. So this could very well indeed be a climate change event. And when extreme weather events take out infrastructure, such as this. Man. Anyways, I'm going to link that below. Y'all can check out the video, which is pretty crazy. Moving on to this. Oh, no, I don't want to listen to that. I'm sorry. No, thank you. Quiet, Trumpy. This is from The Guardian. Oil firms to pour extra 7 million barrels per day into markets. Good news. No, terrible news. This is from October 10th. Projected production surge in next 12 years to be led by Shell despite climate crisis. Despite climate crisis, the world's 50 biggest oil companies. Didn't even know there were 50 oil companies in the world. I thought there were like 3. And then they owned 5 little ones each. That doesn't make 50, does it? Are poised to flood markets with an additional 7 million barrels per day over the next decade, despite warnings from scientists that this will push global heating towards catastrophic levels. They don't care because they are psychopaths. You can't treat psychopaths like anything else but psychopaths. New research commissioned by The Guardian forecasts Shell and ExxonMobil will be among the leaders with projected production increase of more than 35% between 2018 and 2030. Well, kiss your children goodbye, basically. And, I don't know. I hope you invested in some oil stocks so that you could be, really super wealthy. You got some, dividends in those 10 years before everybody died. Hope that worked out for you. A sharper rise than over the previous 12 years. The acceleration is almost the opposite of the 45% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 that scientists say is necessary to have any chance of holding global heating at a relatively safe level of 1.5 C. And that entire paragraph is completely laughable. But it definitely is in opposition to the 100% reduction in carbon emissions that we need by December. The projections are by Rystad Energy, a Norwegian consultancy regarded as the gold standard for data in the industry. The rising trend they reveal highlights how major players seem to be ignoring government promises, scientific alarms, and a growing public outcry so they can pump more fossil fuels and profits out of the ground. Yeah. The forecast shows an almost 8% rise in the projected output of the top 50 oil and gas companies between 2018 and 2030, which would account for almost 2/5 of the remaining 1.5 C carbon budget and increase the risk of heat waves, hurricanes, forest fires, and floods. At least 14 of the 20 biggest historical carbon producers plan to pump out more hydrocarbons in 2030 than in 2018, according to the Rystad data. Great news. Dieter Helm, an Oxford University academic and government advisor, said oil giants were planning a final fossil fuel harvest. When you put it that way, that sounds really nice and fun, a harvest. If we were serious about addressing climate change, we would leave some oil in the ground, so there is a scramble among big oil companies to make sure their assets are not the ones left stranded. Wow. Their answer is to pump as much as they can while they still can to keep delivering shareholder dividends. The problem for the rest of us is that they are going to produce far more oil and gas than is consistent with the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement being an agreement okayed by the fossil fuel industry, I'm sure they'll be fine with all of this, right? Right. Among publicly traded companies, Shell is forecast to increase output by 38% by 2030 by increasing its crude oil production by more than half and its gas production by over a quarter. This is so it's clear that these people are not going to do anything about this. That they're not going to hold themselves accountable. The likelihood that governments are going to hold them accountable is very, very low. I'd like to hope and think that they will, but I don't have any faith in that whatsoever. Why? Because the fossil fuel companies are going to make sure that whoever's elected in government is going to be friendly to their cause. They're going to push out, smear, malign, deter any progressive or anti-fossil fuel people. They're gonna really make sure those people don't get in office. So, I don't see it happening politically. So that this is the time if we really want to show our solidarity. We should be boycotting en masse the fossil fuel industry. In every way that we possibly can. This should be, what if we had 10 million people or 20 million people boycotting for weeks on end? Perhaps striking, perhaps shutting down oil factories and refineries. Could we damage them? Here's the thing, though. The oil industry has been in trouble for years. Why? Because oil prices have been too low. So the ROI, the return on investment, has been almost 1-to-1. So it's been unprofitable for a lot of companies to actually pump the oil. And so they're doing all the things that they can to make the price of oil rise so that it's a profitable game again. But if you take the demand away, then you kind of sink their whole business model. That's my thoughts anyway. State-owned Qatar Petroleum is the only company planning a bigger increase of 58% by 2030. You go, Qatar. This is horrible, horrible news. Well, speaking of somebody who does actually want to try and do something, and will he be maligned before he gets into office? I don't know. This is Bernie Sanders, of course. You know his face. You know his name. Sanders wants to give workers corporate board seats and reverse Trump tax cuts. So he just keeps on rolling out the plans, which are actual full-fledged, really well thought out, totally, very, very robust plans, and they, overshadow and outpace everybody else's plans, and even Elizabeth Warren's weak-ass plans, her wannabe plans. By the way, I was watching the debates last night, and I don't know. Here's the thing that I've been seeing, and if you watch any progressive news channels, you'll see that Elizabeth Warren really knows all the facts about Medicare for all and all about, socialism and corruption and taking down corporate. Like, she knows all the facts when she's standing on stage, on a debate stage in front of millions of people. As soon as she walks off that stage and they ask her questions, specific questions about those things, she starts to go, she just, all of a sudden it's like, what? Well, it's all good, whatever. I mean, there's lots of ways we can do this. All of a sudden she gets very unspecific. And that's a red flag to me, people. A big old red flag, especially when somebody's talking about, taking money out of politics or corrupt corporations or people accepting donations. And she has done just that in her campaign from her last Senate campaign and transferred that corporate-backed money into her presidential primary campaign. And she's like, flailing about, traipsing about like a wood nymph in the forest. Like, I'm only taking grassroots donations. You already took $10 million of corporate PAC money. So it's not all grassroots. Sorry, Liz. Anyways. So Bernie rolled out this plan to even the playing field and take corporate power down a notch or a few notches. Taking aim at the vast inequities produced by America's business-dominated economic system, Senator Bernie Sanders on Monday unveiled a far-reaching proposal that would roll back President Donald Trump's tax cuts and transfer far more power to U.S. workers by giving them seats on corporate boards and ownership shares in their companies. Sounds like socialism to me, and I like it. Or, you could just call it a co-op system or worker, allowing the workers to be involved in the means of production. Establishment tells us there is no alternative to unfettered capitalism, that this is how the system and globalization work, and there's no turning back. They are dead wrong. Sanders, a 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, writes on his website, the truth is that we can and must develop new economic models to create jobs and increase wages and productivity across America, and all of that nonsense being aside. And I only say nonsense because it's, capitalism, or paradigm. So yeah, he rolled out this plan. It's pretty great. I will, to give it a little bit of context though, if he really cared about climate change, he can't say this while he's campaigning, obviously. But if he, gets in office and he's like, oh, climate change is the number one problem, then he would be like, well, we're just going to nationalize all these industries. He did talk about nationalizing the energy industry, and that is brilliant. But he's going to have to nationalize a lot more industries than that, and he's going to have to just be shutting things down left and right. And lastly, in this video, U.S. imposes penalties on Turkey, aiming to stop incursion into Syria. So Trump did actually start to put some economic sanctions on Turkey. It's an interesting story because the Kurds have reached an alliance with Syria and Russia, and to kind of put a halt to this the Turkish thing. This is a complicated area, and this is a complicated story, and I know I'm just going to put this out there that if you're getting your news about this from the mainstream media, you are most likely misinformed on some level. So, you really got to go outside of the mainstream media, and I suggest progressive news channels on YouTube and other places. The Hill, Tim Black, Jamal Thomas, Jimmy Dore, Secular Talk, Humanist Report. How many more are there? Mikasa Sukasa, Nico House. There's, so many. Graham Elwood. There's so many progressive channels out there that are doing good work, and that will give you a little bit of round out the information for you. Another one of those channels is the Gray Zone, and Aaron Maté hosts this show, and this is an interesting interview with Ben Norton. Not an interview, discussion. And it just gives a little bit of different context. I really urge you, if you are concerned about the situation over there, to listen to this interview, just because it gives a little context. it's a very mixed up situation, right? There's actually plenty of evidence that the United States backed not just the moderate rebels or the what was it, the SFA or SDA, Syrian Defense Army or whatever it was. I think I'm messing all that up, but there's also a lot of evidence that we supported ISIS or created ISIS, and so it's a very, very there's lots of misinformation going on. It's a very complicated situation. What Ben Norton is kind of putting forth is that the fact that we're leaving actually increases the likelihood that stability will take place in Syria. Because if we actually do leave and we stop backing all these opposition forces, things can kind of just settle out the way that they're going to settle out. And this has gone on in the past, and this is the biggest argument that people have for pulling out of regime change wars or wars that we're in illegally. The war we're in Syria is illegal. And there was no reason for us to go in there. We actually kind of made the whole thing happen. Or we exacerbated the situation that was already happening, but we definitely are the destabilizing force in the area, and that is by design. That is intentional. But every time we want to pull out of somewhere, somebody floats the idea, the entire military industrial complex goes, oh my God, their heads explode. Oh my God, you can't possibly do this because humanitarianism. You're going to leave some people exposed, right? And the point is that, you do want to thwart, bad people doing bad things. However, when you become the bad people doing the bad things, it's probably it's a good time to leave. And we really have to just get our troops and our forces out of the entire globe, and let other nations and people do what they need to do for themselves, have some self-direction, and we can take care of ourselves. This seems to be beyond the pale, though, for most people, most liberals, neoliberals, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that Trump's intentions are good. They are. There's probably a lot of weird, or not very on the up and up intentions on Trump's part. But this is just something that I do support people getting out. And so there was, obviously a big humanitarian crisis and people crying out to help the Kurds. And it looks like they've got help, just not from us. And now we're sanctioning Turkey. So we're actually going to punish Turkey for doing this, and looking like that's going to ramp up as well. So this is, we got to see how this shakes out. I still am a fan of getting the hell out of Syria and Afghanistan, and Yemen, and whatever else we're doing, and Iraq, and not going into Iran, and not going into Venezuela, and whatever other things that we're trying to cook up around the world. I'm in favor of not doing it. That is all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.